really what it comes down to is there shouldn't be room for ego in our jobs, because we're dealing with natural systems and we're never going to get it right. And we shouldn't be, so rabidly adamant that we have got it to the point where we're not listening to other people. And geology should be fun. If you're just doing it 9 to 5, well, you're probably not getting all the stuff you can get out of the rocks that you should.
Today, I'm speaking with Brett Davis. Brett is a structural geologist, and Brett basically does what I've always wanted to do, which is to get paid to map and solve geological problems. We talk about where he's been in the world, what sort of projects he's worked on, how structural geology really is important in the work that we do as resource geologists or even in exploration. So we listen to some of his war stories. Great chat. I hope you enjoy it. Let's get into it. Hey, Brett, good to see you.
Yeah, likewise, mate. It's been a while.
Yeah, well, look, I was just going back through a bit of email traffic that we've had along the years, but I don't think we've actually met in the flesh. But I think talking about a number of structural geology jobs over the years and some of the work you've done along the way, I've always been interested in what you put out on things like LinkedIn. And as a structural geologist myself, I was dying to speak to a structural geologist and actually talk about structure. I've put a little book on the table, which I used to use as a Bible, Twist and More Structural Geology, as a bit of a wink. But after chatting about software and innovation, really keen to actually talk about rocks for a change. So nice to meet you and good to see you.
Yeah, unfortunately, virtual seems to be the way of the world at the moment, doesn't it?
But, it works. It's not the same. I only had one talk here in the studio, and it's definitely much nicer to speak in person, obviously. It works. It works, and the whole day is made up out of Teams meetings and so on. But it's a good way to connect still with people, and I'd love to get out on the road again. Are you doing much work at the moment on the road? I think you.
I have just started again, yeah. So I've been doing some domestic stuff, but I guess I had a couple of projects which were hanging for 2 years, would you believe, because of COVID, and they were in Canada. And that's the most recent job that I just did for 2 separate clients. So it was a bit onerous in terms of travel. Travel is painful at the other end in Canada, which a lot of the Canadians acknowledge. But the rocks and the people, once you got there, made it all worthwhile.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, it's so good to be back
plus
out.
A dose of COVID.
Yeah. I think we've all dealt with it. My previous guest, actually, I was supposed to talk with him a couple of weeks ago, but he had COVID right at the end there, and a few other guests, and it sort of throws the calendar around. But we've been able to get very creative with calendar movements, so we just make the best of it. And we're all busy people, so appreciate you making the time and actually coming in to have a chat to us. And look, just to start it off, I'm really, obviously, as a structural geologist myself, fascinated by the role it plays or should play. And again, been watching your writings and musings online, particularly, and YouTube clips as well. I think a couple of your presentations that I find really interesting, and I was really keen to talk to you about that crossover between good structural or just good geology, right? Because I think people can get a little bit too excited about calling it structural geology. I mean, a lot of the stuff we do when we map is more than just structure. But really get into your head about what you think makes a difference to a project, because you see a lot of things when they do tend to go off the rails a little bit, and you got to ask why. A lot of it has to do with geology, and not to give ourselves a pat on the back or make ourselves more important than we have to be, but it is quite important to infuse a good bit of rock doctoring into the formula. So I thought that would be a great place to chat to you about, because you've seen so many projects. I was just looking at your history, and maybe you want to give us a quick background as to how you landed what I ultimately, coming out of university, you've got the job that I always wanted to have. So I'm sitting here with a little bit of jealousy, I must admit. I wanted nothing more than just to go out there and map stuff and get paid for it. And I thought that was the best thing ever. But I found it's such a niche-y field, and you have to just be really, really, really good at it. And there aren't that many people that can really live up to that. You know, you being one of them and working in that space. Yeah, really interesting field. And I mean, I couldn't come up with more than 10 people who do what you do out there, you know, that work at that level. So maybe how did you, is this always what you wanted to do as well, coming out of university and choosing a career path? Because you started as a production geologist. How did you roll into this?
Yeah, I was a bit of an anomaly when I went to university, I must admit, because I went there to become a geologist, whereas a lot of my colleagues, they fell into the course because they failed others. So
Yeah.
I'd always been interested in rocks. It was fostered by my parents. They used to take me out looking for fossils and so forth. And I did 3 years of chemistry as my degree, and I was going to become a geochemist. And then one of the theses that we had to look at as part of our undergrad was a geometric analysis, and a PhD. And I just looked at it, and I'd done a lot of technical drawing and perspective in the past, and a lot doing a bit of sketching, and it just really appealed to me. So I went to my honours supervisor and said, "Look, I want to do a geometric analysis. Give me a really deformed area, and let's see how we go."
Yeah.
So I did that for honours, and then I went to Mount Isa Mines as a production geologist for 2 years. And the way I fell into that was in my second year, I got a hold of Mount Isa Mines to do vacation work. And so come the end of my honours degree, they said, "Yeah, we'll have you back." But my supervisor, Tim Bell, a remarkable man, a genius in his own field. Some people think he's a lunatic, but I think a lot of people considered lunatics are actually very, very clever lunatics. And he was,
exactly.
he just said, "Look, do really well with your honours, get a first class, and you'll get a scholarship if you want to come back for a PhD," which I did after 2 years. And I wanted to look at process. I didn't want to do the structural geology of this deposit or, that batch of rocks. I wanted to know how things really worked. So I wanted to understand from the grain scale up. So what happens to all the individual minerals as we form fabrics and geometries? How do we move fluids through the crust? How does that then transfer to big volume changes, like when we put igneous intrusions into the crust? And then take those overprinting and geometric relationships and extend them further to look at the timing of mineralization. And so most of what I do now is just, as you said earlier, it's just good geology. Or at least I hope it's good geology, but it's not just structure. You have to integrate everything. I do believe structure's king, but it can't be king without, a lot of colleagues advising it, and that's the igneous petrology, the metamorphic petrology, and so forth. So I did that, and then I was going to become a researcher because I just loved it. But after 2-3 year postdocs and seeing that it was a part of the world where a lot of people have access to grind, and there's a lot of fish going for a very small batch of money. I had a young family. I thought, no, I've got to go back into industry. So I went back in, joined Delta Gold in Western Australia. And it was like an internal postdocs working on Kanowna Belle mine. And because there was 12 months of money and I finished the project in 7 months, I then had time to actually look at other projects. And since then, my work has been either as an internal consultant in companies until such time as I hung my own shingle out. And part of that was I was the geology manager for Consolidated Minerals, which is a manganese mining company. And after going through the global financial crisis, one of the most hideous times of my life, because I had to retrench a heap of geologists through no fault of their own other than the economics of the situation. Come the end of it, I got out. And I remember the CEO saying, but why are you leaving? You're a good manager. And I said, "Mike, this job has got knobs on it. I'm never going into management again." So I didn't. And so I've been doing consulting ever since. So that's sort of the long version of how I got there. So it's been a long apprenticeship. And I would like to think I've pretty much loved every moment of it. Even the bad experiences are learning ones.
Oh, well, that's it. I mean, the bad ones are learning experiences, and as long as they're not bad because you end up in a jail somewhere in a faraway country where you don't want to be thrown in jail, or whether it's just a tough job with difficult expectations and deliverables. I mean, there's always a learning out of it. But yeah, if you can stick to the rocks in a puzzle. I mean, I quipped the other day when I was talking to Mike Stewart. I mean, we basically get paid to solve puzzles, right? So it's really that's how I see it. And if you get given the freedom to do that as a consultant, and if you can take the report writing, for what it is, then that's really as good as it gets. That's so again, talking to a jealous man here, but I guess the old adage, the best geologist is the one who sees the most rocks at the end of the day, and that really truly applies to your profession, right? Because the more you see,
Totally.
the more you see those. Oh, wait a minute, I've seen this before, because it's recognizing patterns, right? I mean, that's one of the sort of things I wanted to maybe start off with. I mean, what makes, apart from the perhaps slightly outside on the histogram personality, what makes a good structural geologist, and is it that out of the box thinking? Is it just framework? Is there a process? What's the special sauce there to be really good at it? Is it just simply experience and seeing a lot and just putting that all together, or is it that 3D perspective that others talk about? Or I mean, some people can think in 3D and some others can't. Those kind of things.
Yeah, it's a multifaceted answer to that one. You're exactly right. The 3D thinking is something that's important. So I had in my background a lot of geometric drawing and perspective, and I've always sketched things, and I've been able to visualize stuff in 3D. So that I did notice in undergrad, it was one of those things that some people weren't as good at doing, whereas to me it came fairly naturally.
Mm-hmm.
The next one is seeing enough projects and so forth. But I guess one of the others is as you go along, you develop mentors who actually help and inform you. And one of the sort of the very good things I've got is a very wide network of both industry and academic professionals. And I'm not scared to say when I don't know something.
Mm-hmm.
And getting a hold of those people and looking at their perspective and integrating it back into your story. I mean, it can change things markedly, but generally for the better.
Yeah.
And what I've always said to people is structural geology isn't hard. It's really just two things, and it's geometry and overprinting. So if you can recognize geometries and how things fit in 3D, and this is before you even get to something like Leapfrog,
Mm-hmm.
sketching it in your notebook, thinking about it when you're in the field and so forth. And the other one, which it just really amazes me, bewilders me, is to this day, there are very, very few people, when they get their first drill hole or look at their deposit for the first time in an open pit of that, they don't sit down and try to work out the evolution and work out a geological history and see what are the overprinting relationships, which alteration assemblages fit with which veins. And you may have seen some of my dissertations on veins that I've put on LinkedIn.
Yep.
There's so many permutations to how you interpret these things that you have to be very careful and very ordered.
Yeah.
And you can waste a lot of time and money just measuring the wrong things, focusing in the wrong spots and so forth. So I'd say geometry.
You need somebody to come in with that experience and knowledge at that point in time, because at the moment, or the last 5 or 10 years, or maybe a time period doesn't apply. I mean, exploration geologists, as passionate about their geology that they are, I mean, the people running the rigs don't always have the 20, 30 years geology hardcore experience. And what I see and what we do a lot of is drill the holes, put the sample in the bag, get the lab assay back, right? And that's obviously part of the solution here is to insert geology at an early stage, but it does require, I mean, as simple as it might sound to you, there's overprinting relationships, plenty of younger geologists and people with experience like myself. You would look at it and say, well, I think I see that, but I just don't have the framework of reference to do something with that, because it's a real experience, injection there that's required. So it's easy to say, yeah, we need that at the first drill hole. But like I said, people like yourself are pretty rare, and not everybody has those skills to put that down on a piece of paper.
No, but you have to start learning it somewhere along the line and giving these things a go. And I just had a conversation with a group where I ran a workshop on the understanding of their deposits, and I tried to enforce in them that if you spend a day just laying your drill hole out and understanding it, you might save yourself a month at the other end by knowing, you've drilled in the wrong direction. And if you don't understand those things, then it becomes more expensive and more time consuming and so forth. And I've had some pretty negative experiences where there was one project in particular where I went to the trouble of putting all that stuff together. And then another consultant on the project tried to dismiss it and said, well, we really should lump stuff together. And what I had done is put every element of the geology together. So tried to understand all the alteration, all the veining, all the structure. And in the end, there was something like, I think it was 26 items, which is not that many when you consider you've got half a dozen vein types and a few alteration types and several intrusions and a couple of fabrics. And this guy then stepped outside of the confidentiality realm and went to another person and told them I had 26 fabrics. Right. So you can see there's a lack of understanding there, but there's also patch protection, which makes it very hard. This person didn't want their ideas questioned.
Yeah.
So you often, when you walk into a project, you wonder, is this going to be a receptive group where I can actually give them what I think is important and whether we can learn from each other in both directions?
Yeah.
And laying that first hole out, it's not just understanding the geology, but it's also being able to document it. So one of the key things is with oriented core, I go to so many projects and they've drilled, 6, 8, 10 holes, and there's problems with the orientations that could have been fixed at the rig.
Yes.
You would have seen this time and again when you're putting your resource. And I've just said, look, get someone in early. It doesn't have to be me, but get someone in who can look at this stuff and focus it and get it right. We'll save time, we'll save money, we'll save frustration.
Yeah, but it's interesting because I'd like to think that the people who hire you to come in know that it is what they need, right? I mean, with the resource geologist, they know at some point they'll need a resource, and they need one of these ninjas to come in and do what they do, whatever it is that they do. Click buttons, black box, number comes out, announcement goes out. But I'd imagine that there's far more buy-in in terms of the work that you're doing by exploration managers that truly understand that they have a problem that somebody needs to come and fix. So you probably walk into less political or tricky situations where the expectations are not particularly clear. Do you sense that with clients? Does it matter where they're from or what size they are? And do you see any patterns in there in terms of that arrangement? Because I'd imagine it quite difficult for you to send out a quote, for instance, because you sort of know how much drill core is there, but you don't know how complicated it is until you get there. So you can probably say, look, I can have a look, and after a week I probably have a pretty good idea of how big the job needs to be, but I can't tell you exactly how many weeks and how many days and how many dollars. There's probably a bit of an open-endedness to that equation that makes it hard to connect with people in terms of what you must complete for them.
Yeah, there is to a certain degree, but I have gotten pretty good at the estimations, and one of the things you have to do is talk candidly with the client and tell them what you think they need as well, not what they think they need, because sometimes those things can be very wide apart. Yeah. And I write into my proposals the amount of flexibility to take that into account and say that, we'll try and achieve these things by this date. And if there's something else done that needs to be done, we'll modify the proposal and we'll do a stage 2.
Yeah.
So I've had a few years of doing this, so I get pretty good at understanding what I think they need. Yeah. And I think one of the keys to this is talking to these people all the way through. So I will send through progress reports in terms of just a short email, 2 or 3 sentences at the end of the day or after a couple of days saying, this is what I'm finding. This is what potentially may happen. Keep this in mind. So if you educate them along the way, it's not so bad. But if you just hit them with a I don't know, an astronomical bill at the end, and it's not what they asked for in the first place, and you haven't said why you've done it.
Then nothing's going to work. Now, look, that's no different to our business as well, and that's I just thought it might be a slightly more difficult given the amount of unknown unknowns ahead of you. But yeah, like you said, you've seen enough, and you know how to capture that to a reasonable degree. It must be nice to obviously come in to solve a particular problem that most of the time I'm guessing people know needs to be solved. And do you ever get into a situation where the puzzle is just too hard? I mean, either through a lack of data or the data aren't clean enough for you to work with, and I'm sure that's a rhetorical question, right? Like you mentioned, the ORIs, if you don't have ORI lines, things become problematic pretty quickly. A number of other things. How do you deal with that?
You're right. There's a number of times where, like, it's very often, you can't complete the job or work the puzzle out. But the key to it is to identify what is required to work it out. And so then that goes in the recommendations section saying, look, if we want to work this out, then we need to do A, B, C, and D. And, maybe I come back once you've done that. Yeah. So that's one of those things. And very regularly what the client will ask is unachievable in the time frame or unachievable with what information they've got. Yeah, exactly. It's common.
Good to clarify, because I mean, over the years we've done a number of structural jobs, and it's not really our bread and butter, but I can't help but I jump on those jobs, because if they paid me lunch, I'd probably do it as well. Probably shouldn't be saying that, but it's
no, we won't. We'll cut that bit out.
Yeah, we'll cut that bit out. But it's nice to be out there and get the compass out and the notebook and so on. But you do want to then obviously deliver, right? We're, as consultants, very focused on must solve the puzzle, right? At all cost, everything, the universe will move and we'll solve this puzzle. And it's frustrating, obviously, for whatever reason, if you can't. But I mean, that stretch, I guess, applies across the board in any consulting. So if you, going back to projects, in the entire value chain and where the work that you do fits in, because I'm sure, you obviously look at core a lot, but do you still get the notebook out and end up mapping at the early stage as well before we even hit the drill rig, or is that not as much what you do anymore?
Oh, look, absolutely, Ren. The things that I do are many and varied. So I do everything from first pass interpretation of geophysical data sets to field mapping, to looking at first core, to doing overviews of projects, through to running training courses. And training's one of those things that I'm quite passionate about and I do regularly.
Yeah.
So, for example, 2 clients in Canada recently ran training courses as part of the scope of the project I was working on. And what I try to do is do those training courses partway through after I've seen their rocks, and I will splice photos and examples of their rocks into the training course to show, this is how we should look at these rocks. These are the processes. This is where the fluids are going. This is why I would suggest that we go to this spot rather than the other one. And it's one of those things that I tried to do every year is run a course in West Africa as well.
Yeah.
And one of the reasons is it's a little bit altruistic. This profession's been very good to me.
Right.
I love geology. I love structure. Most of the people I meet are nice. Like anywhere else, you've got a histogram and there's some real bloody muppets in there that you just don't want to spend any time with.
Yeah.
But guys in that part of the world don't get the opportunity that we do. And I want to give back. So I really enjoy doing that.
Yeah. And that's great. And that's essentially what this is about as well, right? It is connecting people like yourself, perhaps, to, I mean, not that we are sitting here on a Joe Rogan audience, but, I'm pretty sure that, there's a few young geologists watching, and if I would have been watching as a young geologist, that's exactly what I would have loved to have known. How do I develop in this field? And I love what you do, giving back, and I enjoy the teaching side of it as well. Just to connect with people and see the lights go on. I spoke to Jackie Coombs about this a few weeks ago. I mean, completely different line of work, obviously, but busy person, right? But still finding the time to run these training courses. And we don't, it might keep a couple of lights on, but it's not really a revenue model. The training is fun, and it is nice to give back. And I really like that. And where and maybe just as a anecdote, I don't know if you know, and I was just talking about him in the other podcast the other day, but I spent some time with Ian Groves talking about geology. I don't know if you know Ian at all.
I've never actually met him personally, but I've worked on a lot of projects he's worked on, and he does some very good work.
That's how I sort of that's one of the first people I connected with in the industry, because I come from a Dutch background. Nobody ends up in mining or exploration. It's all oil and gas. So I sort of stumbled into this, and I didn't really know what to expect. I think I knew what pyrite was, and that's probably it. And then I got into a project that was led by Ian, and the amount of geology inserted there was just exactly what I was always hoping, and I latched onto that and ended up spending 10 days, mapping around the place with Ian, and we were joking that we should set up this course, it's going to be a mapping course, and we're going to do it in all the wonderful places in the world so that it attracts a lot of people. And then when you do the math and you figure out how many thousands of dollars it costs, it's probably not the best business model again, but we were quipping that it would be so much fun. We'd go to Russell, somewhere, well, that's probably not a good example, but we would go to some some faraway place and look at nice structural geology and put a 2-week mapping course on the ground. But I don't think it would fly. But there is still so much. We had a previous guest talk about education, and obviously geology being under pressure, universities dropping geology courses in Australia, in New Zealand, and so on. And if they do have the courses, then they're dropping the fieldwork components of, from these things. I'm sure you heard all these things, and
absolutely,
that's obviously, really bad news for our industry. So the void needs to be filled, and I've been talking for some months now about who needs to step into that place. Is it consultants? Is it institutes like the AusIMM? But it's the likes of yourself providing these courses. I think Kim Hein, if you know her, she does a lot of work in West Africa. I know Kim. She's also very passionate about that. So that will get the word out. And but maybe one day we'll set up that big school of mapping, right?
That'd be fabulous. And I guess that's where places like Nexus in Australia have really come into their own.
Yep.
So Richard Lilly has created a fantastic niche in actually just showing people how to pragmatically understand and document rocks and how it fits into exploration programs. And some of this stuff, you and I have probably taken for granted, but you think, wow, this is the first time for these people. They actually don't know this.
Yeah.
And that became abundantly clear when I started putting those vein posts together on LinkedIn. To me, this is sort of my bread and butter. And people were saying how wonderful it is. And you think, wow, okay, I really didn't expect this level of popularity. So I did get actually approached by the SEG to try and put some sort of structure stuff together in a publication form. And
okay,
I guess the communications broke down a bit when I said I wanted it to be put out for free, because I really feel that there's half the world is actually missing out.
Absolutely.
So much of the African continent, a lot of Southeast Asia and so forth, these people don't get the opportunities or the training or the exposure to professionals that we've all been fortunate enough to have, which is one of the reasons I frequent them in terms of my training and so forth.
Yeah.
And I give them stuff. And people say, but you're giving away your intellectual property. And I said, well, it's not like I'm in the start of my career and I'm not going to take it with me.
Yeah.
And I progressively update it, and it's not much use to people unless I'm standing there explaining it otherwise. I mean, there's that extra element of my intellectual property which is within me.
Yeah, and it's interesting because a lot of people, and I spoke about this earlier as well, I mean, that they're so happy to connect with anybody online, and LinkedIn is the obvious place for us as an industry because it's so popular and all geologists live there. But I find it truly amazing that you could ask any expert a question and 9 out of 10 times they'll answer you. And in some detail as well. And I talked to Jeff Lyman, who is into sampling, which is really obviously quite a niche part of the industry. And there's a really great group on sampling theory, and people are very happy just to provide free advice. And again, talking to Jackie the other day as well, I mean, there is this freeness and this openness about information sharing that we're not really tapping into. And I also spoke to Richard actually a few weeks ago. I'm not sure the order of which these talks will come out, but exactly about the work that he's doing and how we need more Richards in the world to actually make that transition.
Totally.
That transition from industry back into academics to get these things going. And the more you talk about it and the more you see people being passionate about it and there actually being space for it, it's gaining some momentum. But no one person can solve all the problems, obviously. But nice to hear you sort of aligning with that view, because totally in the same place. Need more of that, and I love doing it myself. Free at the end of the day, we do need to pay the bills at some point, but plenty of information available for free, and that's the way to do it. But field work and mapping and structure, you still want to be on the ground. I know that Dale Sims runs a course, core logging with the AIG.
Yep.
I'm not sure to what degree you know or are involved with that, but another thing that we need more of. And I've been chatting to people about virtual core logging, because in 20 years from now, all of the resolution will be so high that we can probably, with our goggles on, lift a piece of core, see the ORI line, lift our gloves up and do everything and see everything happening. Obviously, we'd rather actually touch the rocks, but that would certainly make it a lot more practical for people that we can't connect with so quickly. So I'm sure there's... maybe let me just jump into technology with you for a bit, because part of the channel is that I like to really explore what technology is out there to help with what we're doing and do it faster and better and smarter. I'm really a fan of core scanning and getting as much value from your core as possible. You can obviously get, whether it's 1 millimeter scale XRF data or rock quality data or structures or breaks or anything. Do you use the data, or do you suggest people collect it, or have you seen a value add from what you do from a structural perspective?
Probably not from a structural perspective so much, but I do acknowledge the value. So what I try to do is document as much as I can from the geological history of the rock. So it's not just the structure; it's the structures and the alteration, the sulfide species, and so forth. And then it's interfacing, particularly with geochemists, people who actually know geochemistry and how this rock is put together in terms of what you've gotten out of it in the assays and so forth. And the key then is to marry the two together. So exactly. I don't step into a field that I'm not good at. I'm happy to work with the geochemists on this and say, well, these are the particular structures that are controlling this alteration. What do you guys see, and so forth. So even though I did, 3 years of chemistry at uni.
Well, you know more about it.
And I was going to do a geochemistry honours. I acknowledged that I would be more dangerous than useful if I strayed into that field. So it's absolutely, as much as we can get out of it is good.
Well, maybe going back to that, sorry to interrupt, but going back to that implicit comment that you made, and I don't really want to sort of dive too deep down in the world of leapfrog and so on for fear of never coming out of it. But, one of the workflows that really, if I talk about structure, and I talked to Mike Stewart about this the other day, who works, for leapfrog and Sequent, and the difference between geology modeling and geometry modeling, and you mentioned the word geometry obviously before, and there is a bit of overlap here. And what I really like doing is looking at the geochemistry, because you do get your 25 rock forming elements, and that really gives you a signature at whatever resolution you like of correlations between drill holes that go beyond the element of interest, right? And to me, totally. So that's that sort of next level resolution from a structural perspective. It's not at that core resolution, but you do see big blocks and you do see big units, and lo and behold, this unit sits here and it sits there, and there's a discontinuity between it, and you got to come up with a reason for that discontinuity, right? And it's either a fault or it's folded or whatever it might be. And I find more often than not that whole structural framework kind of drops out if you have that much access to data. So I'm a big fan of employing a portable XRF on drill chips, core, whatever it is, as long as it's done smartly and knowing what you're doing. And that information, handle it a bit, and quite a few interesting relationships are starting to pop out that go beyond, this 3D X-ray view of the gold in a fold hinge kind of principle,
Yeah.
So
no, that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just worked on a project in Canada, and to me, every rock just looked grey.
Yeah.
And yet there was obviously several different intrusive phases, and they varied in terms of their phenocryst content and distribution and so forth. So visually, it was incredibly hard to work it out. But one of the guys there had taken it upon himself to really dive into the geochem, and he was able to separate out 4 main intrusive suites.
Bam.
Then when we looked at the distribution of them, based with where my mapping had been and what I got from the drill core, it actually made sense. And that was one of those examples of the really useful marriage of 2 disciplines.
Yeah.
And so I totally acknowledge how useful the stuff is that you've just talked about. It's just that I'm not good at it. So I stick to what I'm good at. And,
no, for sure. It's just, it's obviously everything overlaps, right? It's a multidisciplinary approach. That's the whole joy about an exploration program. It's not just somebody really good at this or really good at that. And that's why exploration geologists, I guess, coming back to the previous point, they're jacks of all trades, right? They're not sampling experts. They know enough to know that the sample needs to be representative. They're not structural gurus. They're not geochemists, so they know enough about the lab to know what box to tick, to make sure that all the copper comes out, right? But not too much beyond that in terms of, in terms of real niche information. So it's knowing what you don't know, and then for that particular aspect, get the right expert in, I guess, is one way to put it. So
absolutely. And that's the value of things like LinkedIn. I have got a very large number of people that I'm linked to, so I can actually either think of people that I've worked with before and track them down via LinkedIn and use them, or just, you'll see other people are doing stuff and you think, wow, this could be really useful. And I've actually fostered some very good educational, in terms of my own education, relationships with people through avenues like LinkedIn.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
People will disparage it sometimes, but I've had a hell of a lot more good than bad experiences of it. And, interacting with people like yourself, with people like David Reese, who I'd never met, but, we chat regularly. Guys who are acknowledged experts in their field, where, they've got stuff to tell you. I mean, I learn something new every day.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's exactly, what sort of led me into this, because I started with LinkedIn quite early on. One of the, I had a LinkedIn account at least 14 years ago, I think.
Wow.
And you connect with all these people. And at that point in time, if you wanted a paper, you wouldn't quite go to the person who wrote the paper without feeling a little bit of inhibition, right? But now you just ask and you will get. And this is really the next step beyond that. Now I just want to actually talk to people and hear them out after I've met so many of them at conferences around the place, or spoke to them through LinkedIn and exchange information and papers and details. A number of these conversations have actually led to people emailing me and saying, hey, that paper that you mentioned or that your guest mentioned, can you send me that? And that's really the way, a way forward, I guess, in solving some of the world's important problems. But going back to what you said about, so we're talking about technology, right? Okay, this is not really a technology-driven space. It's I don't want to say old school, but it is really knowing your rocks and understanding your and having seen a lot of them, right? But there is no real development. I remember mapping at some point. I did transition from paper mapping to Trimble, Discover Mobile. That really worked for me, but I found myself walking around like this the whole time. Right, and that just doesn't work. You need to walk around constantly, orientating yourself and knowing where you are and where you're going and what unit you're crossing and so on. So as much as it helped me getting my data in, so that I didn't have to spend 4 hours at night digitizing my data for whatever final product, it did lead me to walk around like a zombie, like, every teenager with their mobile phone on the street at the moment. So then I moved from the Trimble to the mobile phone, and then to a tablet, because it's bigger and it's faster, and you can do more things with it. Are you still a paper and pencil man? I mean, probably a rhetorical question, but any of those platforms take any of your interests? Or
look, I've got grey hair, so I'm sure you've guessed. No, look, I still love the old school stuff, and part of it comes back to I actually like sketching outcrops. I don't mind writing reports. I like taking notes in my notebook and going back through my notebooks, and I'm sure I could master the other stuff, but I actually don't need to with what I do. And what I do at the moment is it works for me. And one of the reasons I get a fair bit of work is I actually enjoy going to site and stamping around out in the heat and looking at rocks. Yeah. Like the last 2 jobs in Australia, both of them were, I think it was 42 degrees, and one was up in the Pilbara where it was, quite dry, and the other one was in the Kimberley where it was as humid as hell. Yeah, miserable conditions, and I loved it. Yeah, and if I start trying to work digitally, I sort of lose the enthusiasm, I think. Yeah, and that's one of the things you need with geologists is not only do you need them to see as many rocks as they can, and I'm still learning rock types every day because I probably forget them, regularly as well. It's one of those things you should be an interested geologist. Yeah. So if you're still keen to go in the field, people ask me, why do I do it? And I say, because I still can. Yeah.
How would you lose the enthusiasm? I was just going to say, next time you go out, if you need a fieldy, I'll tag along. That's a serious offer. I mean, that's I'll carry your hammer or whatever, or the water bottle, or and just.
We'll keep that in mind. We'll have to put that mapping course together.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you shared just now, I had in Eritrea. That was probably last time I mapped something a couple of years ago. But a new country, pretty harsh conditions. Pretty hot, landmines, so things to watch out for, and big long days, and short amount of time to crack a pretty tricky nut with not too much information. But I mean that's exactly right. I mean, new rocks, new puzzles, and you got to find that excitement to be able to find the energy to keep going out and doing that. So.
I had a year of my life I'll never get back working in Eritrea. And the only redeeming feature was the rocks. Yes, the security. We had one of our, when I signed up, we had one of our vehicles ambushed and 4 of the guys were shot. Oh, crap. And then when I was there, there was another occasion when there was some Chinese geologists in a nearby town. So we then had the army as security. They didn't. They got attacked in the middle of the night with rocket-propelled grenades and light arms fire. And I finally quit when I drove a road with a landmine on it, and the army actually hadn't removed it. And I've got any number of stories about that country, which I don't think there's any good ones except the geology.
Well, that sums it up. But that also is a good, and I was joking too when I first came up with the idea to talk to some people and put it on YouTube. And somebody said, what you should do? You should actually have a whole episode just sharing war stories, forget about the actual technical stuff. And because people like yourself who've traveled a bit have got so many of these stories where you go, wow. And I can't remember who I was talking to the other day, but another one at this level where you go, okay, I thought I'd seen a few interesting things, but that's pretty special. That's it makes you appreciate life, I guess, when you come back, fly back into wherever it is you're flying through to get to Eritrea, which is pretty difficult as well. So,
worst airport in the world.
Well, I actually, now that we're there, I decided to bring a drone with me because I wanted to get some good topography and get some real perspective. And I sort of knew that it wasn't a good idea, but I've traveled all over Africa, and usually it's, and you talk. I remember bringing a portable XRF in, and that's obviously, immediate $5,000 of import tax that you need to pay, right? They've got X-ray eyes to see what you're bringing in, and just talk my way through it. Say that it was a coffee machine and it just had some special abilities, and So I was always pretty relaxed about, and I got the drone in, but wasn't allowed to use it because the client obviously said that's not a smart idea. And I actually had it with me for another job. It wasn't actually intentional. I just had it with me. I thought, oh, well, that will be good here as well because I need that perspective. But then on the way out, I put my bag through at the Asmara airport, and the siren went, and I could see three guys, their eyebrows went, oh. And then I went, uh-oh, and I was stuck for an hour, and they took every pencil out of my bag. You know, I had my colored crayons because I was mapping on paper, right? I was there for geology, and they asked, what is this? And I said, it's a pencil. It's, you know, you can draw it. And they were really excited about in a negative way. And some phone calls were made, and after an hour, you know, they sort of let me go. But that was a bit of an oopsie, I guess. It's
I was dragged into backroom security there twice. Once was for stealing gold. Because I had a small quartz crystal with me, and then they accused me of stealing gold from Bisha. And I said, well, you've got every single travel pass of mine. You'll see I was in the other end of the country.
Yeah.
And the other time was for stealing electronics. And because they'd x-rayed my bag, and when they opened it up, it was my stainless steel coffee cup.
Yeah, wow. Was that a Bisha? Did you run into Alistair at all there?
I never went to Bisha. Is it Alistair, the Kiwi guy you're talking about? Yeah, look, he worked in the opposite where I was working in the same building, so I know him. Yeah.
No, that's how I was working with there. But I had some rocks in Mozambique, some gems that were given to me on the rare earth project that I was working on. They weren't happy, but I just left them there, and it's. But yeah, look, we can probably take another hour to this easily, and never. That's probably for over a beer. But look, the last thing I really wanted to throw your way is, you know, I take quite an interest in projects where things don't go right, not to point fingers at it or poke holes in it, but to learn from it and not to be that guy, basically. And particularly in the resource work that I do, the resource estimation work, I'm, you know, very I'm convinced that domaining is a lot where a lot of the pain and suffering happens because we don't get the geology right, and it's really for a whole lot of reasons. But it's so hard to prove it or to even describe what went wrong. And the comments that you find generally it doesn't get made public. And if it does get made public, then the description by the company is obviously of such a nature where you have to really fill in between the lines with a lot of imagination, right? But in some cases, you do realize that it has to do with the geology. What have you come across that you can see linking all the way through that value chain to that point, or even beyond, right? Whether it's actual mining, I'm not sure if you're involved much with grade control or the sort of production side from a geological perspective, but have you come across, and this is not about give me some names and projects, but what sort of things have you seen that very clearly there was a link between not understanding the geology at an early stage and people just, you know, really focusing on data more than anything, put it in a black box, and then, yes, the resource needed to be downgraded 2 years later. Have you got any of that sort of perspective? Or
not so many. What I do like to do, just as an aside, is get projects where there's longevity so I can keep testing my ideas and help refining it and working with those people. Mm-hmm. But I have captured things in their infancy that would have gone really badly wrong. One example was in West Africa on quite a large deposit, and there was some just lack of care and attention with the oriented core. In fact, it just wasn't being used. And all of the sections that had been interpreted for the first resource model were sitting on the table in the office. And I was out looking at the drill core, and I went back in and looked at it, and they had every single zone of mineralization with a vertical dip, and everything was actually sub-horizontal. So it was 90 degrees removed from what they'd said, because instead of linking stuff when you've got a number of inclined holes, and so instead of linking stuff across that way, they'd say, well, the point here joins with that one instead of this point here joining with that one.
Yeah.
So we captured that. Luckily, one of the management guys was there, and I said, "Look, somebody's going to be embarrassed about this. It's not going to be me." And he said, "Oh shit!"
So you're actually the person who are responsible for the image in the mining. What's it? A mining engineering handbook? Isn't there the classic 2 ways to interpret a set of drill holes? One is with vertical things, and the other is one continuous. Do you know the image I'm talking about?
Yeah, I know the image, but no, that's not me. But no, that was the situation.
That's the situation, right? So that's nice because that's the one you roll out in courses that say don't be that person. But it's nice to hear that actually happens. Then it's not nice, but it's interesting.
It created a bit of friction though, because the senior geologist at the time, when I said, "Look, you need to come and have a look at the core," it turned into a yelling match where he just refused to leave his air-conditioned office and he slammed the door in my face. Yeah. And 5 minutes later, he had the Canadian drill foreman down to teach me a lesson. And I said, "Look, mate, let's just go and check the core." Yeah. And we went up and he said, "Oh, look, this is inexcusable." And that guy never spoke to me ever again, the local geologist. Mm-hmm. So some people don't take finding the mistakes too nicely. And another example was a very big deposit, which I won't mention the fact it's in Northern Ireland. Some of the geos there had gone in and they'd done a structural assessment. My colleague was the geology manager and he asked me to go over. He said, "Look, I don't believe their model." So I went and had a look at it. And so these two structural guys had put together a model that basically, when you looked at the long section, it was divided into thirds. And it was red on the ends and green in the middle. And I said, "What are the colours?" And he said, "Well, red means don't go there. It's going to collapse." So it basically sterilised the project. It just killed the economics. And he said, "But I don't believe this." Mm-hmm. And I went underground. It was 80 metres from the office to the entrance to the mine, and you could walk in. Yeah. These guys had not walked in, and they had done their interpretation of historical core that had travelled backwards and forwards along the road for 10 years. So it was gravel. And they just said there's monstrous fault zones. And my colleague implemented triple tube drilling, and we were getting sticks of core you actually had to break to fit into the core tray. Wow. Yeah. None of these things existed. The faults there, they'd have them a metre wide. They would have been 2 centimetres at most. And so that could have killed a huge project, a world-class project.
Yeah. Wow. So, that's just really good knowledge, right? And so the message, ignore the geology at your peril, right? It's These are big decisions, and because it's for a lot of people, perhaps who aren't geologists, the other stakeholders that we have, it's so subjective. Because I always feel I have to apologize when I'm sitting in a board meeting for a client and I have to answer a question about the prospectivity or about some subjective matter, and I always find myself answering in the same manner, which just standard, "it depends," and a number of those one-liners. But it is interesting to see how many times or how many of these stories you can put on a list where big projects fall over on geology and pretty basic decision points.
Yeah, and I've got quite a few examples where people have decided to stop mining or stop drilling in the belief that the mineralisation has ended. And an example was one of the mines. It was actually at Tucano in Brazil, and they'd finished one of the open pits and moved on. And because there was a fault that on the edge of the pit, and when I looked at the overprinting information, the mineralisation actually crossed it. Mm-hmm. So they went back, and the mineralisation continued. Yeah. And it was just, there's a fault. It must have ended.
Yeah, well, that must be the joy as well, right? Because I guess one of the fun things is, as you map it at such an early stage, it really comes down to your true core skills of filling in the blanks in quite sparse data and coming up with sensible models. Those first drill holes coming in, regardless of whether you're still attached to the project, you probably stay in touch with them, right? And said, "Look, just send me the data if you don't mind, because I'd love to see how close I was, or how true this map or this model was," right?
And that's why I like projects with a bit of longevity. If you don't take your failures as a learning, then you probably shouldn't be in the game. If you got everything right with geology, I mean, you're a pretty special person.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't know anyone yet.
No, that's true. Well, look, that's probably a good note to finish on, because that's that applies across the industry, right? We gotta learn from the failings, and again, part of these things is to listen to people talk about some failures as well, whether it's their own or somebody else's, where there is just a good learning. And that's been really interesting. And like I said, if at some point we can look at some rocks together, that'd be fantastic. But let's first get out of this COVID misery and look you up at some point. But anything else that you wanted to add to it? Anything you wanted to cover, or?
No, not at all. Like they're the type of discussions that could go for hours. But I really, what it comes down to is there shouldn't be room for ego in our jobs, because we're dealing with natural systems and we're never going to get it right. And we shouldn't be, so rabidly adamant that we have got it to the point where we're not listening to other people. And geology should be fun. If you're just doing it 9 to 5, well, you're probably not getting all the stuff you can get out of the rocks that you should. And I'm still keen after all these years. Maybe I've got a screw loose. A few people would probably say that.
Well, look, you and me both. And what you said is so true. I mean, if I walk into again, going back to that first engagement with Ian Gross, I walked into that room, and there was a table, and there were sections on there, and there were crayons, and there was a bottle of whiskey standing next to it. And I knew I was in good company, because that meant that after hours, geologists were poring over the table and thinking about the geology. There's probably good music playing, and people had a good time, but if you're clock watching and it doesn't stop at 5 o'clock, right, there's always more rocks to look at and puzzles to solve. So, and that's when you know you're in good hands. So. Very true.
Yeah.
Hey, look, very, very nice to talk to you, Brett. Let's do this again sometime. But for now, thanks so much, and hope to see you again soon.
Absolutely. Look, thank you very much for the opportunity to chat with you. And we'll do our best to catch up.
No worries. Good to see you, man.